This video is brought to you by Nebula. For most of the 21st century, Canada had one of the world's most liberal immigration regimes, which Canadians broadly supported. Today, Canada has one of the largest foreign-born populations in the world, ahead of basically every other large country. And in the past 2 years alone, Canada has received about 1 million permanent residents, on top of many millions of temporary workers and international students. However, in the past year or so, Canadian attitudes to immigration have soured sharply, with a majority of Canadians now saying they think the country is taking in too many immigrants, largely because of the strain they apparently put on the housing crisis. In an attempt to placate voters and stem his electoral decline, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, once a champion of liberal migration policies, has recently taken steps to tighten Canada's famously liberal regime, while signalling a wider reform of Canada's migration policy in the autumn. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how Trudeau's migration policy has changed over time, and whether these new measures could actually help him hold on to power at the upcoming election. Hint, it's probably not. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's get straight into it. For most of his 9 years in power, Trudeau himself has championed Canada's pro-migration politics, setting ambitious targets for new permanent citizenships in recent years, and implementing generous refugee programs for asylum seekers from war-torn countries like Syria and Ukraine. You might remember this from 2015, when a newly elected Trudeau greeted Syrian refugees at Toronto's airport by handing them winter jackets and declaring, "You are home." To be fair to Trudeau, for most of his tenure, this policy worked. Immigrants helped grow the Canadian economy, and polling found that about 2/3 of Canadians were happy with the levels of immigration at the time. However, in the past few years or so, the immigration rate has increased markedly. This is in part because Trudeau set a new target for permanent residents of about 500,000 a year, with roughly 470,000 permanent residents being admitted in 2023 alone, the highest annual increase in the country's history. But the main driver of this increase has been temporary immigration, via a combination of international student visas and a new foreign workers scheme, which was introduced in 2022 after the pandemic. In short, this policy provides temporary migrant visas for foreign workers who want to work in sectors that are struggling with labour shortages, usually low-paid jobs in sectors like agriculture or caregiving. In its inception, Canadian employers could hire 20% of their workforce via this route, but the stock of temporary workers in the country has now swelled to over 3 million, and the policy has become increasingly controversial, which is why last week Trudeau reduced it to 10%. This influx of temporary workers has also masked a severe economic crisis. While at first glance it looks like the Canadian economy has fared remarkably well post-pandemic, with GDP growing faster than every other G7 country apart from the US, that's only because of high levels of immigration, and Canada's GDP per capita has actually fallen for the past 2 years, and is now down to 2014 levels. This comes after Trudeau's government caps the number of international students for the year at 360,000 in January, when the immigration minister claimed that foreign student visas had opened a path for its abuse. Similar policies have recently been implemented in both Australia and the UK, where anxieties about illegitimate student visas and high migration levels generally have caused politicians to pare them back, often in spite of opposition from higher education institutions. So what explains this shift? Well, there's an international angle here, because an increasing number of temporary workers are using Canada's liberal immigration policy to travel into the US via the northern border, which has provoked irritation in the Biden administration ahead of November's election, especially because questions of immigration and border security are political weak spots for the Democrats. The number of monthly so-called encounters between migrants and US border guards, generally considered a useful proxy for the total number of migrants entering the US, previously hovered at around 100, but has risen to over 3,000 today. These mostly come through the so-called Swanton sector, a 295-mile stretch of border reaching from eastern New York through Vermont and New Hampshire. Robert Garcia, the agent in charge of the area, claimed in July that more migrants had been apprehended there in 10 months than in the previous 13 years combined. But the main reason is domestic pressure. In short, Trudeau and his Liberal Party are not very popular in Canada at the moment. Trudeau's personal approval ratings are pretty miserable. 67% of Canadians disapprove of him, compared to just 28% who approve. And the Conservatives, the main opposition party, have now opened up a 17-point lead in national polling, their best numbers since 1988. The Conservatives are polling conspicuously well with young voters, who are twice as likely to vote Liberal over Conservative when Trudeau first came to power. Those numbers have now basically flipped, with nearly 40% of 18 to 35-year-olds now saying they'll vote Conservative at the next election, which is due sometime in the next year. Trudeau's impressive unpopularity is down to a whole load of reasons, but one of them is that many Canadians have become increasingly wary of his liberal immigration policies. Even though Canadians are generally some of the most migrant-friendly people around, there's a sense that the high level of immigration have suppressed wages by loosening the labour market. Unemployment is currently at a 2-year high of over 6% and exacerbated the housing crisis, which is one of the worst in the world. For context, the average house price in Canada has skyrocketed from roughly 250,000 Canadian dollars in 2005 to around 750,000 today. And the ratio between the median house price and median wage has increased from 3 in the 90s to nearly 6 today, rising to 12 in Vancouver and nearly 10 in Toronto. The leader of the Canadian Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre, has made this link explicitly and has promised to tie the number of newcomers to the number of new homes built each year. Given that Poilievre, and to be fair, most experts think that Canada's current building rate of around 250,000 new homes a year is far too low to ameliorate its housing crisis, in practice this would imply a significant reduction in the total number of immigrants. Last week, Poilievre claimed that Trudeau's government had destroyed our immigration system, calling for smaller population growth, and many Canadians apparently agree. Polling suggests that roughly 1 in 2 Canadians now think there is too much immigration into Canada, roughly double the number in 2022. So, will this work electorally? Well, probably not. As other centre-left or left-leaning parties like Germany's SPD are currently finding out, shifting to the right on certain issues like immigration only really works if you do it early enough and with enough enthusiasm that voters feel it's genuine. Conversely, if you do it too late, it runs the risk of looking unprincipled and, well, a bit desperate. Now, this isn't the only news in North America at the moment. As you're probably aware, there's an election happening just south of the Canadian border in the US. And we'll be running through everything that happens there in our new series, WTF USA.
Look, as British people, we often cast a wary eye at our friends across the Atlantic. But honestly, the last few months have been especially wild. We've seen Biden bail from the race after a terrible debate.
My fellow Americans.
The red-blue divide making way for lurid green. Trump accusing Kamala of changing her race. Vance getting accused of couches. Endless memes about coconut trees, and endless arguments over crowd sizes.
This weird obsession with crowd sizes.
Obama making a joke. Trump talking about Biden like an ex he misses. RFK Jr. potentially having worms in his brain before admitting to burying a bear in Central Park. Oh, and an assassination attempt that we all kind of forgot about because of all of the other chaos. I mean, honestly, WTF USA. The thing is though, while it might be tempting to just roll your eyes at these shenanigans, these aren't just meme-worthy moments. And you know I'm serious, because I've not stood up in a video since COVID. But these incidents actually pose important questions, like how much does the Gen Z vote matter this time round? How important will online campaigning and social media prove to be? What impact do running mates have? Okay, I don't have words for that one. These are the kinds of things we'll be explaining in our new Nebula original series, What to Follow USA, only on Nebula. Each week, we'll take the moments that have been dominating internet discourse and explaining the true politics under the hood. Look at me pandering to the American audience. We'll be releasing new episodes of What to Follow every Friday through to the election. The fact that it's on Nebula means we've been able to take more risks with this series. The tone and attitude of the show isn't what you'd expect from TLDR. I'm not sure we've talked about fucking couches on YouTube before, but the journalism and reporting is exactly the standard you'd expect WTF. Nebula support also means that we can do things differently, create additional content for you, and tackle topics that the YouTube algorithm just wouldn't normally allow for. It's not just this new series on Nebula either though. There's also incredible originals on the platform like Modern Conflicts from Real Life Lore, or the upcoming documentary from Tom Nicholas, Boomers, which takes a provocative look at the lives and legacy of the baby boom generation. Plus, we also post all of our normal content on Nebula ad-free, and often before it ends up on YouTube. If you want to check all of that out, plus WTF USA, then head to go.nebula.tv/WTF, or click the link in the description. That way, you can pick up an annual Nebula subscription for a huge 40% off. We're really happy with how this new series has turned out, so please do give the series a look. We'd really appreciate it.